At this point, what I would like to do is introduce our fourth and final artist of the day, Terry Adkins, who is an interdisciplinary artist, musician, and cultural practitioner engaged in an ongoing quest to reinsert the legacies of unheralded, immortal figures to their rightful place within the panorama of history. Under the auspices of Lone Wolf Recital Corps, he stages emblematic installation-based experiences that use a variety of real-time and static media. Terry Adkins holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Fisk University, a Master in Science from Illinois State University, and an MFA from the University of Kentucky. He's exhibited and performed widely since 1982 at the 2012 Paris Triennale, the New Museum in New York, the American Academy in Rome, the Menil Collection in Houston, ICA London, Arti at Amicatae, Amsterdam. I apologize for butchering that. I took 3 years of Latin. I should be able to do better. Whitney Museum of American Art, the Studio Museum in Harlem, Rote Fabrik Zurich, ICA Philadelphia, the Brooklyn Museum, MoMA PS1, the New World Symphony Miami, and Sculpture Center New York, among many others. He's a recipient of the Jacob H. Lazarus Rome Prize and fellowships from USA Artists. He was a James Baldwin Fellow. He's received awards from the Joan Mitchell Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the New York Foundation for the Arts. As a professor, he teaches graduate seminars in figures of thought and sonic measures, plus general studio courses in sculpture and installation. I became familiar with Terry's work through a 10-year cycle that he created called Meteor Stream on abolitionist John Brown. He opened it on the 150th anniversary of Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, the legendary attempt to seize the government arsenal and initiate a slave revolt, the failure of which led to his hanging. From the John Brown House in Akron, Ohio, the exhibition sequence moved across the United States to places associated with Brown's life. In each location, Atkins collaborated with members of the local community and incorporated newly found objects into his installation, referencing the influence of context and time, and hence the element of serendipity on the judgment of actions and the writings of history. That exhibition, or as Adkins calls it, the recital, amounted to a multi-layered testimonial, as intuitive and precise as it was gut-wrenching and informative, the compressed time and integrated historical events and otherworldly meanings. Would you please give a warm welcome to Terry Adkins?
Thanks, Eleanor, for the introduction. Let's see. It's great to return to the Washington area. I was born in Washington, D.C. at George Washington University Hospital. 153 years to the day that John Brown was born. I grew up in a segregated America in Alexandria, Virginia, educated by books that scantily referenced black contributions to American history in the 50s at St. Joseph's Elementary School, and later at Ascension Academy, which was in the shadows of Fort Ward. So all the cities mentioned and the locations dealt with in the exhibition, Eleanor's beautiful exhibition that I saw earlier, are very familiar to me. From Petersburg to Culpeper to Manassas to Frederick. I used to go on scouting tours with my father to in the League of Segregated Schools to scout out the teams, and I would go to high schools named Frederick Douglass, George Washington Carver, Luther Jackson, Parker Gray, Hoffman Boston, and the like. So I'm steeped in Virginia history and am pleased to return to the land of my birth. What I was going to do, in following Dario, I feel like he just showed 3 images. I feel like the person who spoke for 3 hours introducing Abraham Lincoln, who only spoke for 15 minutes. Because I have 190 images to show. But they move fast. What you see on the screen here are titles of what the recital for John Brown has been named as it has moved across the United States. What I first found fascinating about him was that he was subject to the same corner of history, or pushed into the same corner of history that black contributions were in the history books that I grew up with. He was just either labeled a fanatic, a loser at everything, and a failed human being, basically. And being born on the same day as him, I always had an affinity for his story and the great sacrifice that he made of giving his life to abolish the cause of slavery in the United States. And related to the Civil War, he is basically the one who started it. Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey are incidents that you hear of quote-unquote Negro slave revolts, but if you read Herbert Aptheker, they were occurring all over the United States all the time, and those 2 incidents were the largest ones, but they were occurring in communities all across the United States. So John Brown's valiant campaign to start a guerrilla warfare that would extend across the mountains down the United States and amassing an army scared the South to death. Because in a lot of instances, the black community outnumbered the white community in places like Charleston, South Carolina, and other places. So Sanctuary, After Flame, Deeper Still, Greater Deeps, Meteor Stream, Riddle of the Sphinx, Recital in 9 Dominions after John Brown. Here we go. Hanging from the beam, slowly swaying, such the law. Gaunt the shadow on your green Shenandoah. The cut is on the crown. Lo, John Brown, and the stabs shall heal no more. Hidden in the cap is the anguish none can draw. But your future veils its face, Shenandoah. And the streaming beard is shown. We're John Brown, meteor of the war. Poem by Herman Melville, mentioned in Eleanor's show on one of the labels in there, by the church painting of meteors. Frederick Douglass said of John Brown, his zeal in the cause of my race was far greater than mine. It was a burning sun to my taper light. Mine was bounded by time, his stretched away beyond the boundless shores of eternity. I could live for the slave, but he could die for him. And a picture by Augustus Washington in the Smithsonian collection, black photographer who took this picture of John Brown vowing his life to end slavery in the United States. Wait a minute, got to catch up with something here. Walt Whitman. I would sing how an old man, tall with white hair, mounted the scaffold in Virginia. I was at hand. Silent I stood, with teeth shut close. I watched. I stood very near you, old man, when cool and indifferent, but trembling with age and with your unhealed wounds, you mounted the scaffold. What I tried to do is to make a symbolic body of work in an installation setting that pays tribute to the aspects of John Brown. So I guess you could say it's an abstract kind of portraiture. This is a piece called Divine Mute, which intends to show, usually revelatory moments, particularly biblical ones, they're accompanied by either a very big sound or a very bright light. So this is a big sound one. This all started in Akron, Ohio. John Brown planted this maple tree in 1844. Most people don't know John Brown was also one of America's foremost shepherds. He had a sheep farm in Akron. He knew more about sheep than anybody. He created liniments for their ills and even tried to sell his wool in England and tried to develop a union of sheep growers, but they bribed his accountant and the business went bad. But in Akron, he planted this tree. This tree was dying. They weren't going to cut it down. And on the inside, there was some cement in there that I said, can I have it? They said, yes. I couldn't believe it. They said, yes. And so I used it then to make this sculpture you see in the foreground with a shepherd staff there. And I began to deal with 4 aspects of John Brown, basically. One is a shepherd, a soldier, a prophet, and a martyr. So all of these works have something to do with aspects of him having to do with those four things. There's a piece from the inside of the tree along with a rope, obviously having something to do with his hanging. This 3-channel video was made on the grounds of the John Brown house in Akron, and it was about soldier, shepherd, martyr, and prophet as well, and I'll show you some slides from that later. This has to do with the incredible depth of his religious beliefs. This sword like a sword in stone, as it were, knightly times, but in this case, it's a sword stuck in fleece. Those rattles that you see with incense sticks above have to do with the spark that he ignited that started the Civil War. The other is a shield for him. This would be his armor. This is in 1998. I can't even approach putting anything like this on fabric anymore because El Anatsui has just, wow, I mean, can't even touch that. But this is in Richmond, Virginia, and this is how these things were clustered together in this muscular communion where, you had to contend with them as you walk through. On the right, you see the piece with the cement from the inside of the tree. This thing with incense sticks has to do with the military guard that is hanging. This piece of blue wood is an actual piece from John Brown's boyhood home. And by the way, in Alexandria, Virginia, we grew up with Robert E. Lee's boyhood home there. So, the Civil War is all over the place. This striated structure has to do with his 40 days and nights in prison, and kind of like the biblical associations with that, as well as the Good Shepherd leading his flock and so forth, are all there by using the actual materials. The streaming beard is shown as a cranberry rake with fleece coming from it in symbolic reference to his beard and the legend that surrounded them. The piece, Akron was once a big rubber town because of tires or Firestone or something was there, so there was a lot of remnants from the rubber industry, including these solid rubber balls and other molds that I used to try to imitate the military aspect of John Brown and the consequent Civil War that he brought on. This is called Shenandoah. I forgot what this one is called, but it's a simple gesture of cutting a guard for some kind of fan belt device, flipping it, and putting red suede in the bottom part. This exhibition traveled to Florida, where I imagined that he was successful at Harper's Ferry, was able to amass a whole league of accumulating fugitive slaves, and was able to get in league with the Seminoles down there. And another interesting thing about Gainesville, where this was, it's a Harn Museum, it's a place where lightning strikes more than any other place in the world. And so I thought that was really characteristic of John Brown, meteor, this kind of cosmic connections he has with heavenly events. So this is an actual painting of John Brown that I found in Harlem. Some guy was redoing this house, and he found this in the basement. Evidently, it belonged to this artist and this league of artists who had a John Brown Society in New York. I'm having it restored now. It was painted by the son of a famous black painter in Philadelphia who only painted paintings of Lincoln and John Brown. I'm not sure of the date of it. When you walk by these black and white things, it triggered these things to turn, and tennis balls were inside, so there was this sound of thunder. Anytime you walk by, I had it fed through a digital processor. So sound is a big thing. And of course, the gray herons in part of the Florida landscape, Florida materials I found. This is a piece called Vigil. It's filled with taxidermy eyes. It has to do with the kind of vigilant guerrilla watching and camouflage that John Brown and his colleagues would have had to do, which the swamps of the Gainesville area would have provided excellent terrain for. Sanctuary, which is at the Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. I imagine John Brown's 40 days and nights in prison, from which he wrote about 100 letters, and tried to transform it into the feeling that he, through this very calm writing of letters, I don't know if you ever read any of them, but he was fully aware of his legacy, his historical importance, and so I tried to transform the dire circumstances of this once operating prison into a sanctuary, as did John Brown transform the dire circumstances of his incarceration into a very contemplative, reflective kind of situation for him. This is another area. There were 40 cells along, which I did something in each one of the cells for the sake of Abraham Lincoln brevity that Dario has put on me. I'll just show you one. This is an image having to do with his secret code word for the Harper's Ferry raid, which was called hiving bees. And so bees are important to the secrecy of the Harper's Ferry raid, and these cells was a Quaker prison. I don't know if many of you know about the Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. They allow artists to do projects there. But each one of the cells was solitary confinement, so there's this circular hole in the ceiling, and then snow fell. This is the barbershop mirror, and I thought it was somewhat like John Brown's grave in Lake Placid that has this massive stone behind it. Okay, I'm now going to show you quickly some images from the video Apis mellifera, which is the scientific name for honeybee, where me and Adrian Van Stolk are pictured, and all we do is recite the words soldier, shepherd, prophet, and martyr. Then there's the sound of bees, the sound of thunder, and that's all there is. So here are the images. This is me standing on the grounds of the John Brown house in Akron with fleece over me as the good shepherd, as the ghost of John Brown, etc. Oh, the sound of bells are also in it. Bells sounding, tolling, freedom. And when John Brown was hanged, bells rang across the north, all across the northern United States. So there are permutations of these images that occur in this video. There's fleece stuffed inside the tree. And we also had honey dripping out of our mouths now. Every time I look at this, I said, damn, why not use some lip gloss that day? Now I have to live with it for all eternity. But bees, honey, there I am standing in the vacancy of the tree where the cement once was. I'm proud to say that the museum at the University of Kansas in Lawrence owns this and another video. I was very pleased to be there, as that's the land of the Potawatomi massacre and other activities of John Brown when it was debated whether Kansas would be a free or a slave state. So that's what we're saying. That's what is happening in this video. And I thrust this shepherd's thing into the ground here, and it gives off the sound of thunder. So you're going to have to imagine about this. And as the video plays, all of the faces go from color to black and white at the end. Okay. Meteor stream. At the American Academy in Rome, on the 150th anniversary of the Harper's Ferry raid, which was October 16th, I determined that I would do something, and I said, well, how in the world, place had always been so important to the other recitals, how in the world is it going to be related to Rome? How in the world is John Brown going to be related to Rome? Well, all the Italians knew the John Brown's Body Song, which they sang in school. That was the first thing that impressed me. Secondly, I ran across some unexpected connections that the people at the American Academy in Rome were not even aware of, nor was I until I found them. So like Dario, like Sally, like Bill, research is important fuel for what it is that we all do, you know, digging deep, this idea of immersing oneself in a topic in the hopes that through absorption and immersion, something else will happen when that clangs with our imagination. So this was called Meteor Stream, recital in 4 dominions after John Brown. I discovered, number one, that Edmonia Lewis, an American sculptor who lived in Rome, got there by virtue of selling a medallion that she had created here in the United States of John Brown. She used the funds to realize her lifelong dream of making sculpture in Italy. Even more astounding, Charles McKim of McKim, Mead and White, who built the American Academy, his parents were staunch abolitionists. They were at John Brown's hanging. His father accompanied John Brown's body to Lake Placid, was the first person to say prayers over the burial. And it just really blew my mind, and it made me think of the architecture of the Academy completely different from then on. That he had been brought up in this staunch abolitionist family and was building the American Academy in Rome. Thirdly, John Brown's failed military advisor, Hugh Forbes, who ended up trying to turn him in, was an English mercenary who had fought with Garibaldi on the Janiculum Hill where the American Academy is located. So, wow, I found all this stuff out, and I said, whoa, okay, I can do this. Frederick Douglass also came to Rome on his way to Egypt, to Cairo, and he visited Edmonia Lewis on that trip. So all these connections made architecture and place important. So the Academy was transformed into this John Brown Place, by virtue of the influence of the parents on McKim, the son who built it. So, of course, what they call John Brown's fort was important. And I used stereo view imagery to create these films that were really low-tech 3D, right? Low-tech 3D films to bring this thing to life. Because John Brown's legacy, to me, is alive. In death, it has been transformed into immortality. And what he died for, since things haven't really changed that much. The prison system is the new plantation system, as far as black manhood goes, and education is in shambles. What he died for still is with us. What the Civil War occurred about still is with us. John Brown, in looking at his legacy, you could also consider him an artist. You could consider him an artist of the deepest kind of creative research imaginable, right? If we recast his legacy, he had 1,000 of these pikes fabricated by a blacksmith in Connecticut at $1 a piece. He intended to arm slaves who were not familiar with firearms with these pikes. So I had some fabricated myself by a former student of mine in New Paltz, New York. I wish I could have gotten them for $1 a piece, but I was forced to just get 22 of them in honor of the 22 men at Harper's Ferry with John Brown. This is at the American Academy, where I used their coat rack. Their coat racks fit these things perfectly, so it was like an arsenal somewhat. But they're really monuments to these individuals. This is Blanche Bruce, an anonymous mercurial artist who moves between identities when he collaborates with other artists. He's a semi-religious kind of figure and is most of the time invisible, but sometimes he manifests in this way, masked, anonymous. He prefers the anonymous tradition, so he'd rather not be identified with any kind of idea of individuality or genius, which he considers to be really a drag. So, in Rome, churches all over the place. I'm a devout Catholic. The space of the churches, the symmetry of it, the majesty of it, is what I tried to create in this chapel, honoring John Brown as a saint. So there are his garments of priestly nature, somewhat of a casket in the middle of the space. This is the way the whole space looked. A man was lynched yesterday, banners from the NAACP. They're facsimiles of the NAACP's anti-lynching campaign. Also, an aftermath problem of the Civil War, of Reconstruction, of the continuation of racism in America. This is the way the space felt. Frederick Douglass described John Brown as a wolf of sorts. And, of course, Romulus, Remus, Lupus. I took Latin for 7 years, too, and that was amicitiae in Amsterdam. Here's the imagery. John Brown was also a postal worker in Meadville, Pennsylvania, but it was also part of the Underground Railroad. So in the discussion of landscape in the Civil War that others have mentioned, my landscape is a landscape of Kansas, the underworld landscape of the Underground Railroad, the landscape of Toronto, the landscape of Virginia and places prior to the Civil War that John Brown himself activated by his campaigns. This is a book printed. I try to involve everyone in the academy who are creative. So Russell, damn, what's Russell's last name, Bill? Anyway, he was the resident printer there. I had him make this book, which is an address that Frederick Douglass gave at Storer College about John Brown to commemorate that. And in the book was this image, which was from the Alexandria Gazette, and it shows the military layout of what happened when John Brown was hung, because no citizens were allowed to come around. They had it quadranted off. It was a military tribunal execution, and no citizens were allowed. So they had it. This is the map of how, I think the, where's the little red thing? The noose is, the hanging thing is right there in the middle, and these are units of military units that surrounded it, and one of them was from Alexandria, where I grew up, which I found interesting. So that image led to a series of overlay maps that I did as drawings for the exhibition that looked like this. That once again had to do with Harper's Ferry as this place, this magical place, the conjoining of two rivers, this place of transition that turned everything around for American history. And there was also video. In Rome, the idea of perspective, the history of one-point perspective also was influential. So I put these videos, which are the two on the monitors are the low-tech stereograph ones, and at the end I got to play around with the configuration a little bit. But here we go into what the videos were doing. Images of Harper's Ferry, the place, Meteor of the War, and back in the back you see the Hiving Bee video playing, 3-channel. And then that goes into another video. If there's time, I will try to show you. But there's scenes from John Brown's burial place, of images of Antietam, but mostly images of Harper's Ferry itself in stereo view. Stereo view playing in stereo to this one-point perspective thing in the back. So this was constantly going on, and there was sound in this far image. And at night, it would do this. It would reflect inside of this kind of casket with, I guess you could say, starfish, that images which you would find inside Egyptian tombs. So for Frederick Douglass' trip there. Now, most of the recitals have a live component to them, and that included using everybody that was a creative person at the Academy, like Don Byron, the great clarinetist you see here, who agreed to play with me, and wow, that was great. Marty, who was ran the program playing cello. Peter Campion, who was one of the poetry fellow, reading a poem he wrote especially about John Brown. Don and him playing. I'm on soprano there with them. That's my son Titus. At this stage, they were my guests in Rome. We spent the whole year together. So this was an instance where he actually did have to do what I asked him to do. And my daughter, who wrote a poem, which I'm going to find. She wrote a poem. I asked her to write a poem, and she didn't want to do it because she thought her poetry is best if it's stream of consciousness with no topic. But she wrote, and I asked her, well, do you want me to play with you, or you want Don to play with you? She said, I want Don to play with me. I was hurt by that, but anyway. Here's her poem called Fighting for Them. Let me put on my reading glasses. Bill was there for this, and Bill's daughter was in it too, and I employed all the kids as well as everybody who's created. Well, here's Fighting for Them. The darkest shadow in the night creeps upon the big black ship. The shadow of the ship sways back and forth across the Potomac, and the color of them were a brutal black. At the end of the long road that awaits them, there is freedom. Freedom, the end of suffering, the end of pain, the beginning of what might be love. The peeling night perks upon the breaking dawn and towards another day of cruel and pure agony. Their thumbs are red with blood. I have died. I have died. I have died. I have died, fighting for them. This is more activity. And at the end, I made everybody pick up one of the pikes, and they sang John Brown's Glory Hallelujah song to stamping the pikes on the ground. So it involved everyone. And Bill, is Bill, you in this picture with Bill? No, Maggie is there. There's Maggie and Turia together there in the middle. And then when I came back to Philadelphia, the site of W.E.B. Du Bois's wrote the Philadelphia Negro there. So I wanted to do something based on his take on John Brown and call it the Riddle of the Sphinx. They're the names of the 22. This is a piece of announcement. It had mirrors in it. This is a work about Mrs. Brown, who had to watch, 3 of her sons killed and her husband hanged. Here are the names. With the trouble that Oberlin is having right now, it's hard to believe that 2 of the graduates of Oberlin on this list, one of which was Langston Hughes's grandfather. Langston Hughes's grandmother used to sway him in a cloth from Harper's Ferry. His name was Leary. Is Leary up there? Lewis S. Leary was one of them. So everybody at the performance had to read these names as they were putting pikes on the ground. There are the pikes again. This piece has to do with the railroad, which John Brown agreed to let go through, which really meant that he got caught because there was a woman on board who was stripped. This is an actual chrome-plated piece of the railroad itself. This is a piece I made called Prophet. That's a memory jug wrapped in parachute with nautilus shells. It has to do with the influence of seeing Michelangelo's Moses, horned, John the Baptist, head on the silver platter, John Brown, martyr, and the biblical associations thereof. So you could say it's a big urn. Tambourine, crystals, rattles, books at the exhibition. This is at a university dormitory, so I wanted students to be able to access them. And on December 2nd, the day that John Brown is hanged, black citizens in Philadelphia used to have what's called Martyr Day, which they named it Martyr Day and would hang black fabric across there. So for Philadelphia, Jamal Ad-Din Tacuma, the great braces, and other students of mine did this, and we marched to reinstate Martyr Day for the city of Philadelphia. And went in a meeting with the mayor to make December 2nd Martyr Day again. So we marched through campus to drums on December 2nd, the day of. So this idea of space and time and place being important just as important as maybe to Dario using materials or relearning a craft associated with an earlier time. And as for Sally, to revisit and re-envision the land and still what it has to offer up after all this time. And that's it.